Hi, I'm John Griffiths, Executive Director of GALECA, the Society of LGBTQ Entertainment Critics, and I am pleased to announce that we're about to start our second GALECA Authors Club Zoom with two very esteemed members that we love and adore. We love and adore all our members, but these two especially, they're classics. Clarkisha Kent, she has written a book called Fat Off, Fat On, a Big Bitch Manifesto. We're going to find out all about that in just a few minutes. And Manuel Betancourt, he has written The Male Gazed on Hunks, Heartthrobs, and What Pop Culture Taught Me About Desiring Men. It's a mouthful, but, you know, it's enticing, isn't it? Anyway, so these two people have come from very different lives, backgrounds, but they share a lot of commonalities. Is that a redundancy? Commonalities? They have commonalities. Yeah. Anyway, so I really wanted to get down to the nub and of why they wrote these books, and I assume that it has something to do with the fact that they identify as queer and feel a little bit different in society compared to some people. And what even, you know, their crushes were, you know, growing up and on the big screen and on TV as well. I hope that all sounds fun. I think it does. And so I just wanted to kick in. Is that even a phrase? With Clarkisha Kent. I was trying to be alliterative, but anyway. So Clarkisha, tell me just a little bit about where you're from and what you were like as a kid. I'm just curious.
Yes. So I'm from the state of Tennessee. My parents are, Nigerian, and they immigrated there. It was one of their final stops, because initially the choice was like New York or Michigan, and they decided Tennessee because they're like, oh, there's not a lot of Nigerians here. Lies. And they found out, but yeah.
Where in Nigeria?
Yes, where in Nigeria? So my dad's from Lagos, and then my mom's from Benin City. And then, they both moved here. I covered a little bit in the book, but obviously it's more messier than I'm describing it. But yeah, so grew up in Tennessee. Was much more quiet, and I would say like muted than I am now. Much more colorful now. But yeah, very quiet. I grew up in the church, so that was its own thing too. So I definitely had to kind of like suppress parts of my identity that I don't have to do now. So yeah, that was kind of the skinny for me. Other than that, I did find solace in, like you said, like television, film, lots of like fictional characters, fictional worlds. So that kind of helped me kind of like channel some of that creativity and identity that was being stifled. So yeah, that kind of led me to now, where my love for these mediums kind of helped me like transform along the way, if that makes sense.
Right, sure. Well, I would imagine it was even more of an adjustment for your parents. Yeah, I mean, going from Lagos to what, Nashville or somewhere in Tennessee.
Yeah, we were in Nashville. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds was that anxiety inducing for you as a kid? Not to get too psychological here. Was that part of your own where do I fit in kind of feeling as a kid?
Yeah, definitely. Because we were in America, but my parents definitely wanted to hold on to their customs, like food. We went to like fully Nigerian church, which very interesting, because even then, there, people think again, Africa's this one big blob of thing, which racist, but we'll keep going.
The African
But
blob.
yes, right. For my parents, they're specifically of the Edo tribe. So we were in a church while Nigerian that was fully Yoruba. So that was his own side thing too. Like even like a side cultural thing happening over my head, because I'm not aware of those things yet. So definitely anxiety inducing, because this was a new home to them and they found it hard to adjust for a lot of reasons. And some of those anxieties came out and were projected onto me, you know, the American child. So yeah, it's very difficult for all of us in very different ways, but
Yeah, well, that's, that's America in some ways. Manuel, tell us a little bit about your parents and your childhood.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Colombia. I was born in Medellin, but I grew up in Bogota, and my family is Colombian for generations. And I was a very bookish, nerdy, shy little boy, kind of angry. And I kept to myself, and I did sort of like Clarkisha talked about, like found solace in what I was watching. And a lot of this stuff that I was watching looking back was very international, because I didn't just watch Colombian soap operas, but I watched Venezuelan TV and Peruvian TV and Mexican telenovelas, but I also watched, Italian music channels and a lot of American stuff, which is why I sound like this. Like as a kid, I went to a British private school, and I did not come out of it with a British accent, which is still one of my greatest losses of my life. But I loved watching like Seinfeld and Saved by the Bell and Family Matters and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, well, like as a little kid in Colombia, and I watched it in English. And so I owe my whatever accent I have, or unaccented English what I have, to truly watching probably more TV and more films than was probably advisable for an 8, 9, 10, 11 and something year old. Yeah, and then I didn't move until I graduated from high school. And then I went to Vancouver for college, and then to the East Coast for grad school. So I've constantly been trying to think back and think through what it is that I gathered from all those images that I saw on the big screen and the small screen that were so different from me, right? That I seemed to connect with things that were happening in high schools in the United States, or were happening, in far out galaxies far, far away. And sort of the male gaze came out of trying to sort of make sense of that and see. It is a mouthful, but what it taught me about what it is to be myself, and what it is to be a man, and what it is to want men, and maybe you're not supposed to want men, but yeah. And so and now I've been here in the US, I guess, almost 20 years. I graduated high school in 2003. Oh dear God, I just realized that's
So you're
as I'm talking about
acclimated.
it.
You're acclimated.
I acclimated just fine. I mean, this country has a couple of things that I will continue to not be acclimated to and will continue to baffle me to no end. But I guess, yes, grand scheme of things.
Yeah. I would imagine Clarkisha and her parents would agree or understand. Clarkisha, well, both of you first, I'm going to ask Clarkisha first, but I'd love for both of you to tell me about the first images on TV and in movies, and maybe just billboards even, that shaped you for the better in some ways, and then also ones that really affected you when upon reflection for in not great ways, maybe harmful.
That's a great question. I would say the first one I really gelled was probably Sailor Moon. I love the whole like magical girl thing. I think it's amazing.
Sailor Moon?
Sailor Moon, yeah. Sailor Moon also got me into like planetary stuff early. I had to come back to that because of the church, they're like, astrology is evil. So I had to drop that for a second. But Sailor Moon, great. My favorite was Mars, but also Jupiter. So I went back between them because Jupiter is really tall. So anyways, yeah. There was that. And then on the flip side, stuff that I didn't like that like affected me for like the not great was like anything where I really came across a fat suit. So I would say like, I'll give you an example, like Nutty Professor or Big Mama's House, like stuff like that. I was like, I don't like that. So, and that was also difficult too, because I really loved Eddie Murphy, but I didn't like that. So yeah, those would be my like kind of top things that
Okay,
affect me.
you're gonna have to edify me. Sailor Moon. I'm not aware of Sailor Moon.
Okay,
If there's a
so I
sailor
mean,
involved and a moon,
Sadly, not those sailors. It's fabulous.
yeah, it's how do I describe it? Oh my God. Man, well, you want to give me some?
I feel like we need to do like transformation montage.
Yeah.
It's an anime, and it follows this like young girl with beautiful pigtails, and an adorable cat, who has these like mystical powers, and she's part of this like group, and they all have like there's Sailor Jupiter and Sailor Mars, and so they have all like various different powers, and there's this mysterious guy called Tuxedo Man, which was the one that I obviously gravitated towards. He may or may not be featured in the book. So, but yeah,
well,
it's great, and
Clarkisha,
they're all tall and beautiful, and there's a blue-haired and blonde, and I don't know, they're fantastic.
well, Clarkisha, why were you drawn to that? What did it represent, or why was it a boost?
I just, me, I can be a little corny, so I just love the idea of the power of friendship. Like they were all really good friends, and that often whenever there's like a big bad villain, and they would try to go at it alone. We could be hard headed, right? It never worked, but they join hands together and then defeat the big bad. I just think that's really cool. Because I talked about in the book where like I don't really fuck with my family. But I have been able to navigate through my life because of my friends. So that message resonated with me a lot.
The found family.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why television and film, maybe especially television, are so important. Regarding what we see. Look at Friends. Would have been nice if one of those friends, or How I Met Your Mother. This has been, this is an old chestnut, but at this point, but what were the producers and even the cast thinking? Like looking around, going, wait a second, let's have some maybe somebody from that doesn't look like like we're all related, if that makes sense. Anyway, Manuel, how about you?
Well, I feel like riffing on that, because anime was also a big formative part of my childhood, and the anime that I watched Sailor Moon and I loved it. The one that I gravitated towards was the Zodiac Knights.
What's it called? I'm sorry.
It's
I'm an old
called,
man.
see, I always forget what it's actually called in English because I watched it in Spanish, but it's they're called Zodiac Knights, and so similar to Sailor Moon, they were all young boys instead of girls, and they all got powers from different constellations, and they have these like beautiful armors, and my favorite was Andromeda, who was this young boy with beautiful green flowing hair, and a pink armor. So that was, in a way, it was teaching me a lot of things about myself, or like these things that you sort of don't recognize at the time, that I was like, oh, of course I, as a little closeted queer boy, would gravitate towards the one that has the pink armor and the long flowing hair and is named after a constellation that's about a young ravished woman. And when it came to thinking of images that sort of hurt me or that I had a hard time sort of gelling with, we see how my country was portrayed. Like watching a lot of Hollywood stuff whenever they came to Colombia, or whenever any stories about narcos, like they were all particularly not great. The one that I keep thinking back to, and I watched it later as a teenager, but it was with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which has this like the opening scene takes place in what they call Bogota, but what actually looks like a tropical island. Which I was like, Bogota's in the mountains, and there's like a temperate weather, and I don't know why Angelina Jolie is in like linen and is like sweating, and there's this but every time that I saw Colombia portrayed on screen, it was always this like weird tropical nowhere land, and it was like dangerous and cartels, and I'm not to say that that's not what I grew up with, but it was always sort of particularly painful that was the one thing that was the only thing that we saw. reflected back at us.
Right. Isn't there a show on Fox now about a maid? I think she's from Central America, or she's the cleaner or something. She cleans up the dead bodies because that the cartel, the people have killed in the cartel. And I haven't watched it, so I can't recap it for you. But she is trying to get out from under the thumb of the cartel, and yet another, drug world. We're with as is for last names.
Yeah, it's a genre unto itself, and I understand the appeal, but to me it's always been, I'd rather be with Sailor Moon and Zodiac Knights and fighting, right? And these things about like focusing on community or focusing on friendship, I think like those are the kinds of themes that I right now would rather be watching more and be nourished by than like violence and rampage and cartels and dead bodies. But
right now in your books, in Clarkisha, in Fat On, Fat Off, what would you say the genesis for writing the book was?
Genesis for writing the book actually came at the hands of my agent, Claire Draper from the Band Agency. I actually initially didn't want to write it. I wanted to do a Western that I've been working on since college. But then they talked to me and they were like, okay, so Westerns are very, not to say they're not good, right? But it's very niche-y. I'm in a known right now. So it'd be weird for me to like kind of dive into that niche genre because I don't have the name recognition yet. So they were like, okay, why don't you do like this first and you can come back and do that. And then I was like, I don't wanna, but you making some points. So, then I pivoted. This was back like 2019.
Is this your first? This is your first book?
It's my first book. It's my first book. So pivoted from that to the book, and then basically throughout all of like 2021, after the contract came in 2020 is how I wrote the book. And now it's here. I have a very interesting relationship with it, but I'm definitely proud that it is done.
Well, what were the conversations like to get you to do it? Like, did they probe you for like, hey, what are some things really on your mind that you want to get off your chest? Is there an impetus for this? Was there an essay that you had written? Anything like that?
Yeah, so it was twofold. So Claire, my agent, had actually been following me for a while on Twitter. That's actually how we connected because they slid into my DMs 2018, 2019. And they were
Check
like,
your DMs.
Slid into my DMs, yeah. And they're like, do you have an agent? And I'm like, no. And they're like, cool. So then, we linked up. And then, they were aware of some of my like past stories, especially my parents and stuff, because I haven't like been super shy about it. I just haven't gone to extreme detail like I do with the book. And then on the flip side of that, I'd already written a couple essays from Into More, like part one before they was shuttled and then reopened. But yeah, I wrote the story about like the bisexual man I met in college. That was already done. So after Claire had read that, they're like, okay, like, can we do like more of this? So that was kind of the basis of how I came up with like the other mini essays in the book.
Gotcha. And Manuel, same question for you. And then I want to hear about your, the personal parts of the book that were most difficult to write for both of you.
Sure. It's funny because I think that the questions are related. So in 2019, it's sort of the same thing. I've had pieces of this published sort of throughout because I've been, after I graduated from grad school and I pivoted to doing like media cultural criticism full time, I've been toying with pieces that began with personal stories and, about how I related to certain films or certain TV shows or certain figures. And in 2019, I had this idea to like maybe start collecting them into a collection, and they would be sort of roughly about the films that formed me. And I wanted to sort of write a sort of a book, but it would be about the films. So it'd be about film cultural criticism. And I just didn't think I didn't get far into it. And then in 2020, the pandemic hit, and I was like, well, all of my freelance stuff is just dried up, and I should do something productive with my time. So I was like, oh, I should go back and revisit that proposal. And then I realized, like, oh, I don't really want to write the really personal stuff. I just want to write cultural criticism. So maybe I just write about all these films that meant something to me, but they had something to do with the way they depicted masculinity, or they depicted desire, or depicted queerness. And I found an agent, I queried an agent, and then we talked, and he was like, this is great, but it needs to be more personal. This reads like a, sort of like an academic group of essays. And I was like, I am an academic at training, so that makes sense. He was like, no, it needs to be more personal, and you need to be the thorough line. You need to guide us through these things, give us a reason why we're following you. And I was like, okay. And then we pitched it, and then the editor at Catapult picked it up. I was like, this is great. This needs to be more personal. And like, so throughout the entire process, they were like constantly threading me out. And they were like, we want readers to get to know you so they can go on this ride. And because I came from academia, and because I'm a little bit shy, I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. I was like, no one's gonna care about my story. Who's like, I'm just this like kid. I'm very self-effacing. But eventually the book ended up, it reads a little, sometimes it gets described as a memoir, and I bristle and I get really defensive because I'm like, it's not a memoir. I didn't write a memoir. I'm not that. But it has a lot of autobiographical elements. Like, you do learn a lot. Like, it begins with me as a kid watching Sleeping Beauty on the big screen, and it goes through what my teenage years, and then my years in college. So like, you do get to know me, but every time is to open up conversations about what I was watching on screen and what it was teaching me, but also boys like me who may not have seen themselves on screen, or who may be sort of embarrassed by the way they were reacting to things they were watching on screen. So that time-wise, it worked the same as Clarkisha. So I ended up, I think, we signed the contract in like 2020, and then I ended up working on it and then submitted it in 2021, and then we did rewrites. And I only still have advanced review copies because it doesn't come out till May 30th, but hopefully soon I'll have like the nice hardcover that I can sort of show off, and I'm very excited about. And so yeah, there's a lot of personal stuff in there. The hardest part to write there's a chapter where I talk about my coming out, and specifically the scene where I tell my mom and how she reacted. And I think that was, it's funny because I was visiting her while I was writing that chapter. I spent like a month in Colombia because my mom and my sister were going through like medical stuff, and so I was there to sort of help them. But it meant that I was like spending time with them as I was writing about this like very pivotal part of my health, and that was a little bit hard. And it is, I'm still sort of very protective of that, and it's the things that scare me the most about having other people read them, because it does feel like I'm just like opening myself up and being very vulnerable, which I'm not usually in my criticism. In my criticism, I'm like, when I'm writing a review for Variety, or when I'm writing a piece for Vulture, like it's there, and or for Into More, which I also wrote about before they shuttered. And those pieces tend to like live on their own, and they stand on their own, and they have very little to do with me. So it's been a journey, and I think it'll still be a journey to like put this out in the world, and then try to not take criticism of the book personally, and in both ways. Like, I don't want any good thing that I take to feel like that's adding to my self.
The critic is criticized.
Yeah.
It's always a conundrum. Just a quick question before I ask Clarkisha to get into the
Personal stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, Manuel. So how did it go coming out to your parents?
So it's just my mom. I lost my dad when I was a kid. It did not go great. Initially, it did not go great. The line that I heard back was, "What did I do wrong?" Which is not a line that any queer kid wants to hear. And so that was hurtful, and it was a very patchy couple months, and I had to like fly back to Vancouver after because I was still in college. But she's been making up for it ever since, and not in a sort of like that she needed to, but that she's been totally supportive. She doesn't read or speak English, but she's been translating. She's been reading the book, like translating via Google, which I find sort of very endearing because she wants to read my work and she wants to know about it. And so the initial moment, and I think that first year after was a bit of a shell shock for both of us and for the entire family. But she's, ever since, she's been super supportive. I go and visit. She asks me about dating stuff and about my guys, and sort of it's
so she came around and
she came around.
she did her
Yes.
research.
Yeah.
Clarkisha, yeah, what was the most difficult portion of the book for you to write? And did you, like Manuel, have an editor that was urging you to open up more, or was this for you a case of wanting to just let it all out?
So I'm actually pretty private. I know my internet persona is like, what? This a lie. No, I'm actually quite private. I feel like some of us, put on a little bit for the internet. You got to sometimes. So I would say the two things that I'm gonna give you two things that are really very tough to write for me. Obviously, it was about, my family. I don't have a good relationship with them, and people knew, but like, obviously I had to delve into some of like the grisly details, which, otherwise I would have never like shared like that. But like, I really had to go to the genesis of my family. So that was really tough because I don't really like people in my business. So that was number one.
Well, before number
two,
two, just wondering, just for the sake of context here, for viewers,
yes.
what about your relationship with your parents involved your sexuality, or what is what are you comfortable sharing here?
Okay, so funny enough, I never formally came out to them because I was just like, at that point, I was like, it's not your business because we're not even cool like that. But before then, the church thing was really the thing for me that did it. Because even though they never like directly, my sister got more of that, fortunately, but even though they like never directly like oppressed me based on like sexuality or how I express sexuality, which it wasn't much because again, I was in that house, kind of oppressive. Most of that was performed through the church by as a proxy thing. So yeah, they let the church do the dirty work. And that's why I personally couldn't gel with them, because you would go to church and you hear about damnation and how all the gays are going to hell and da 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 da. And in my mind, I'm like, I guess I want to go too because it sounds like heaven's gonna be really boring. Just thinking about stuff like that, it's gonna be really boring. Like, it sounds like hell's gonna be a party. But when I was much, much, much younger, that didn't, hell didn't sound great. So thinking about how things like that, my parents encouraging that. And then you also have like purity culture, which is like extra hard on girls, but specifically like Black gay girls. So like it's very much levels to it. So after kind of being put through the ringer via that and my family, I was like, no. So
Wow.
yeah, that was mainly the thing, which also bridges over to the sexuality part because, because of purity culture, I had to do a lot of deprogramming around my relationship with like sex and beliefs around sex. So yeah, that was hard to delve into because like I'm telling this story, which is full of, many awkward parts, many mishaps, many heartbreaks, all that stuff. Just kind of laying my sex life bare. So that was really, I was like, there's a lot going on. It's a lot going on. But, I had to like kill my pride and just like put on the paper and be like, everybody likes to act like they're glamorous. I'm sure other people relate somehow, but it's definitely hard because I didn't want to do it. I didn't. But like you mentioned, my editor also pushed me as well. Because she like, you mentioned this here and you like keep going. You should like flesh that out. And I'm just like, I don't want to do that. And she's like,
So to
but like,
speak.
it's really, yeah, it's gonna clinch the story, together. So I'm like, all right. And she's a great editor. Her name's Lauren Rosemary Hook for Feminist Press. Really good. She really did that. Like, she knows how to use a red pen. I use a red pen, her like cyber red pen. But yeah, she's really good, and I'm very grateful to her. Because she mmade my story very coherent, very precise. people really underestimate how important it is to have a good editor. Because, you know, I've read other books where I'm like, could have used one, you know, like things like
Yeah.
that. So yeah.
A lot of books are that are this big, by the way. Now, do you what is your manifesto?
Yes. Okay. So I'll give you like the overview, I guess. I think my point to this book, besides kind of like reconciling like my own journey with myself, is kind of not even kind of like pointing out that fat phobia in general is very sinister. People think it's
I'm
just
sorry,
about
what's sinister?
fat phobia.
Oh, fat phobia, yes.
Fat phobia. People think it's just about like name calling, which is a very elementary understanding of fat phobia. Fat phobia is as oppressive as racism, misogyny, homophobia, queerphobia, lesbophobia. Like there is a whole system, right? Again, why the plane seats on planes are too small for most of us. Why those stools at the bars, very ugly, can't fit it. You go to the store, try to get some clothes, they don't carry your size. Like the idea is even passively trying to like push you out of greater society or make it hard for you to exist in greater society, even in the most like, even in ways that people think are very silly. So I basically wanted to use my story to kind of detail all of that, but also the different parts that intersect. Because at the base of fat phobia is racism, but also really fucked up things about gender too. Because based on what gender you are and also how fat you are, that'll also affect what's happening with that. So yeah, I just wanted to use my personal story to kind of get that message across. Because when you try to explain these concepts without the personal touch, like Manuel said, it can come off as really academic and detached, and people just kind of close their ears. So I wanted their ears open so they can receive, you know, what I'm saying.
Right. You know, you want people to relate and absorb and have things resonate for change. Manuel, what about you? What was the most difficult part of the book other than coming out? Like, what are some parts of it that were also difficult to write?
The hardest part about writing a book was coming up with this narrative as sort of as a structural piece of it. And it's kind of boring to think through because it was a sense that I needed to take these readers on a journey and that I needed to start somewhere and end somewhere. We would have learned something along the way, that there's a reason why I wrote this book and there's a reason why I wrote it and why you're reading it and you're getting something out of it. And part of what it helped me was this organizing principle, this organizing question, which is, do I want them or do I want to be them? Which I think gets to the heart of queerness and queer desire and what society sort of expects of us and expects us to want. And I think because, you know, when you have same-sex attraction, it's hard to think of that as not being blurred and not being like, oh, I want someone who's like this, so then should I be like that? And if I'm not like that, will everyone else want me? And sort of it can sometimes be disorienting. And the thing that I do in the book is like I go through movies and TV shows and public figures and reality TV to see like what are those messages and how have I been over the years and over decades been negotiating that question.
Like Love Island.
Like Love Island, yeah, sort of. I'm
just kidding.
But I think of something like I'm trying to think of a specific example, but like if I saw like really, you know, we were talking earlier about sailors. So those Jean Paul Gaultier ads from the 90s that had these beautiful buff sailors and they were sort of feminine, but sort of masculine. And I was like, ooh, I found that really attractive. And then I had to be like, oh, does that mean should I be bulking up and having muscles so that people will want me? Is that the only way people will want me?
Right. And what about you, Clarkisha? I mean, I can totally relate to what Manuel is saying. I decided no early on that I don't want to look like, you know, somebody walking around in Carell. Yeah,
also
no,
in the book.
Not for me. I like a natural body. Anyway, Clarkisha, are you, you know, one of the many sort of victims of the media saying that we should get married and have a perfect family and, you know, live a rom-com?
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? Restate the question. I'm sorry.
Are you sort of living in a world where, did you grow up living in a world where you feel that rom-coms, you know, the wedding industry, you know, by proxy, told you had to be perfect and get married and have kids and all that?
I mean, yes, but I mean, Christianity did most of that. Like that industry didn't really have to. Christianity already like kind of like hammered that into me at a young age. So I had this like plan where I was like, okay, I'm gonna, 18, leave, go to college. I was gonna go nearby initially, which crazy, no. Leave, go to college, come back, and then within like, I don't know, the first couple of months of being out of college, I was gonna find some random dude. Apparently, this is my plan. Find some dude. We're gonna fall in love, have our first child within a year or two or something. Like it was weird. It was weird looking back now. But then I was like, it makes so much sense. But yeah, no, that was definitely Christianity did that itself. Because there was this whole like game plan for us as girls in that church where, I talk about in the book where I'm like the choir to upstanding like young lady pipeline that they had going on. So you be in the choir, and then like I guess the men in the church or the boys had their like pickings. It was silent, obviously, right? Nobody comes out and says these things, but had their pickings of or whatever. And if you found someone in the church, cool. If you had to go outside the church to find someone or in another church, there was some like side eye happening. But yeah, that those tenets were definitely like church influenced first. And then when I left the church going to college, I was like, okay, none of that shit makes sense. So then I could like properly deprogram now that I wasn't in that environment. That's the thing. When you're stuck in it, you can't see that it's bullshit. So
right. And a lot of people, know they're stuck in it and they're happy with it. It's weird. In this patriarchal society, here's a Ron DeSantis, just kidding. Anyway, so was there any nugget that in your, upon reflection, as you're writing your book, there is some big epiphany where you didn't understand a certain part of yourself that you do now? And I'll ask Manuel first.
I think the entire book was a journey of sort of self-discovery and self-examination, and like these things that I maybe didn't understand or didn't have the language to. I think if there's anything that I took away from the book, was also how imaginative we as queer people can be, because we're sometimes so, submerged in a culture that is not our own and that doesn't support us, sometimes in quite legal and sort of cultural and political ways, but that we do find joy, and that we do find ways of taking things that were not for us and then making them our own. And I think there's a lot of that in the book that I found myself, that I was like, oh, that's what I was doing as a little kid. I was like remixing and sort of grabbing, one of the ways I think about it is like grabbing the flowers from the weeds. So it's like there were things that were not there for me, but I still found that nugget, and then I kept it, and it helped me build and self-fashion myself in the way that I am. And getting to look back and be proud of that little kid, that he was still able to do that, even in a society and in a culture that maybe would have not wanted him to do so. That was actually quite heartwarming for me.
Yeah, that's very sweet. Clarkisha, you have a smile on your face.
yeah, I mean, I was just listening. I was like, I find that very it's very inspirational. I hate using that word because it feels kitschy, but I do. So for me personally, epiphanies. So that's actually a great question, John, because I actually do all of my processing through writing. So sometimes I'll have like two ideas in my head that are just kind of like standing there. And then when I start writing about it, they're like, oh, they're connected. Then the synapses starts firing and stuff. They're like, okay, they're connected. For me, the epiphany that came to me was definitely like me, but also family related, right? So I finally put together that like my birth quite literally like changed the trajectory of my like entire family. Sounds a little narcissistic, but that's what happened, I showed up and a lot of shit went left. Obviously I had to like sit with that and be like, wow, like, did I do this? Like, did I fuck this shit up? And I thought about it, I was like, that's one way to look at it, but how I ended up looking at it was the fact that, you know, it kind of mirrors my present day life too, and where, you know, I show up to certain spaces and it is disruptive because of like who I am, you know, Black, queer woman, dark skinned woman, fat, disabled, you know, there are certain spaces that will be transformed by proxy of me stepping into them. Sometimes people aren't going to like that. And, you know, I have to be okay with that. You know, I have to be okay with like not being liked, or maybe initially having, you know, bumping up against like gatekeepers and authority figures. Like I had to get really comfortable with that, because like you mentioned, a lot of change can't really happen if you play nice. You know, you can try to play nice, but you know, sometimes you got to speak the language, and sometimes the language is not nice. So
Right,
that's
sure.
kind of, yeah, that's kind of the epiphany that came to me while writing. I was like, oh, I've always kind of been disruptive. But yeah, so
Well, that's great. Now, I want to open it up to questions to our many attendees. But I wanted to wrap things up with both of you, just myself with just we'll note the date of your book, release dates, and you know, when we send this out and post it on our glamorous YouTube channel. What is there one role, one character, you know, that more recently that where you see yourself in a movie or a TV show? Clarkisha?
yes. So I would say Diane Nguyen from BoJack Horseman. Her life story, I mean, aside from, you know, I didn't marry no Mr. Peanut Butter, because no. Like I hate him. But besides from that, like her story, like literally, like even down to like the immigrant family background, even though I'm obviously not Vietnamese, but like that immigrant family background, like I really like strongly relate to that. But yeah, her life literally paralleled my own. Even back in like 2018, 2019, like those journeys we took with writing for like, I don't know, like a girl cruise, you know, writing for some like news site like that, and then going from that to like our books, memoirs, and then she finds her footing with the children's book. Yeah, I really, you know, I really loved her journey, because she had to do a lot of introspection to like again deprogram from her abusive household, which she also didn't talk about that a lot, which I appreciated, because sometimes we don't want to talk about it, right? So she had to do a lot of like looking inward and deprogramming to really like find her voice, not just in her writing, but like in her like real life, so that she was able to, you know, leave people like Mr. Peanut Butter and BoJack behind, like people that didn't serve her, or people that were just bringing out like the worst parts of her. So really love her character, really do.
Interesting, great. How about you, Manuel? Is there a movie or TV character that really is you in many ways, or that you connect with, or
I'm not
not?
gonna be able to beat a BoJack reference, because I think that show is so good. Well, it's funny because the other thing that I noticed while I was writing the book is that I tend to relate to characters that are very unlike me, and that there might be a kernel of truth, but it's always so masked in a lot of difference. But the character that I go back to often, and it's not recent, but it's Julia Roberts' character in My Best Friend's Wedding, who is a critic. She's a food critic, not a TV critic. But there was something that I was watching it as a teenager, and then I go back to over and over again about her over eagerness and just even her desire to like destroy a marriage before it happens, which I find in my head, I was like, oh, this was my queer awakening. This was like me already railing against sort of these patriarchal sort of rom-com tropes and rooting for this, what we're lead to believe is a villain, but to me, she's like the hero of the piece. And those are the kinds of characters that I tend to gravitate towards, that are I've yet to find like a a queer Colombian writer. I think I guess the closest we've been getting recently is Guillermo and What We Do in the Shadows, about this like kick-ass Latino vampire slayer, which allows me also to live my Buffy fantasy. So, and who suffers no fools, and who's doing the dutiful work and that goes unrewarded and unremarked by everyone around him. But yeah, those are I think the ones that I immediately came to mind when you asked the question.
Interesting. So I'm going to look at you as stealth. We have a guest that has joined us, Kenneth Anderson, one of our very more his knowledge of cinema history and the more obscure parts of it are very impressive. Kenneth, do you have any questions for our panelists, our authors in our GALECA Authors Club?
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate both of you for this is your first books for both of you?
This is my second. My first one was a 33 1/3 on Judy Garland's Judy at Carnegie Hall. It came out in May 2020. So in my head, it's this like phantom book that never happened because other things were happening at that time. It was also with an academic press, so it feels this. I keep joking that was my EP, and this is my first album.
Well, I'm so impressed at the topics you guys chose. I have a question because I also grew up at a time where it felt like the screen images were very important for me finding myself, but people in my family and my friends never really understood. They thought that movies and television were an escape, but it always felt like I was finding myself. And so I wonder, did either of you go through a period where you felt that no one understood your immersion in media?
Good question.
Absolutely. I think aside from like me mentioning Sailor Moon and other things, I did a lot of things with like comics. So lots of superhero things. So like the Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, but then you have Batman, the Justice League, that kind of thing. So I was really super into that. And yeah, there was a disconnect. They really couldn't understand if like me being interested in anything that wasn't like super Jesus-y influenced. That's also the reason why I didn't get into Harry Potter, which I'm very grateful for that now. But then I was very annoyed because it was like, I'm missing out on important culture because of this really weird religion. But like you mentioned, media definitely was, my way out. Because then I could get into the thing like with Sailor Moon and friendship. I could get into these different superhero mediums and talk about like justice, fairness, but also like unfairness, inequity, especially with like, let's say, the X-Men, right? So yeah, people definitely like didn't get it. I was the weird kid, which fine, but that's.
Revenge of the Nerds. Did Manuel, did you?
I had a bit of the opposite, mostly because my mom worked in media. So she runs an animation production company in Colombia. So I grew up surrounded by animators and storytellers, and there was a sound booth in her office, and and she understood because she had studied sort of preschool education, and that's what she and in a different life she would have been a teacher, so she always understood the didactic power of TV and of film. So in that sense, I felt very encouraged, which is why I was able to watch so much TV. She took us to the movies all the time. We spent Sundays in bed just watching American sitcoms, and so in that sense, the fact that I was immersed in media wasn't that shocking. I think it was the kinds of media that I then gravitated towards. Like, she loves herself in action film, and I'm more of a indie drama, and she likes to things go boom, and I love heartbreak, and but yeah, I was very fortunate to sort of grow up in a household where like all of these hobbies she sort of encouraged, and she always wanted to show us more stuff and to get out of it something. We watched a lot of behind the scenes featurettes and DVDs. Remember when those were a thing? And directors, and that was very helpful because constantly when I was watching, I wasn't just watching, but I was always thinking about like, how did they do that shot? And how do they structure this? And so many choices went into making this one shot and this one reveal happen. So I think that's what initially made me go into criticism, is that I was always watching, but I was always sort of thinking about how the thing was made, and it's helped me throughout the years in that sense.
Huh, interesting. Kenneth, do you have another question for our guests?
I do. I have many. One of the in my blog, a lot of times when people write me, they ask me why do I think so many gay people are drawn to movies and fantasy and images? And I can only answer for myself, saying that it felt like I was born into a lie, being a Black gay male. It felt like the real world felt fake, but movies got me some sort of truth. And so I would like to ask both of you, is there any element of truth that you guys find in these fantasy spheres, like movies and television? Something very real.
That's a great
Great
question. It
question.
makes me think.
Great question. Yeah.
Sorry, Clarkisha.
I think there's so much truth to that. I think personally for me, the reason why I gravitate towards these things is because they show me personally what is actually possible, and show me kind of like where the limits of this, like, people's imagination are. There's like a sad element to that too, but it keeps me like somewhat hopeful, because that possibility is enough for me to, like, inspire me to at least do my own work to like work towards that. But yeah, definitely, I'm definitely with you in that, like, yeah, this iteration of our existence definitely feels like just
Yes.
it's just garbage. I'm like, can I go to like Earth 256 where it just makes sense to be a gay? Like, if you're not gay now, you're weird. Like, I would love that alternate, that alternate reality. But
yeah, it's well, fantasy. I think that it is rooted in hope, and that's a human quality. So that's sort of beautiful. Manuel, what about you? I would like to say that I'm from the planet Zorbon, and everybody is just, totally anime.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would have anything to add, because I think that's key to, I think, why a lot of us gravitate to stories and storytelling, is that there are things that we wish that we see there that we wish we could recreate in our lives. And that's, to John's point, like, they become hopeful and they become templates. And I think queer folk or marginalized folk sort of in general, and across various different intersections, like, will have been finding filmic and screen images that they can then turn into realities. Like, we see utopias, or we see what can be possible, and push for what if it can be true in fiction, there's no reason why it can't be true in reality.
Yeah, and on the flip side, to bring it down, you have The Handmaid's Tale, or things that not fantasies necessarily, but caveats, and science fiction or horror movies that show what we do have, a dark side, and the best of them have heroes that we can connect with, and also people that fight, are the disruptors that you were talking about, Clarkisha, so that the worst of the worst doesn't happen. Anyway, but I digress. Kenneth, did you have one more question for these wonderful people?
Do you guys mind if I ask one more?
Sure, go ahead.
It's well, because you both delved into your personal lives, and it sounds like it wasn't natural or easy for you. Do you feel that any element of where you felt like the more truthful you were with yourself, the more you were having to draw other people's privacies out? Does that make any sense?
I get what you're saying. Yeah, like, by proxy.
Yes.
Yeah, I did. There's, especially my family, their stories are interconnected with my stories. And people out there, they feel a way about that, and that's fair to them, because, like I said, I don't like people in my business, so I too feel a way. But as the saying goes, treat people well, right? So if they do end up like writing about you by proxy, right? Then it's not a big deal, because you didn't do anything to them. So, like, you being part of their stories at that point, like incidental versus, okay, you're part of my story because you were, you know, not the best, I guess, best character, right, in my story. So yeah, I definitely agree. It did require, you know, not necessarily borrowing, but drawing in some of those stories from, you know, other people. And obviously I tried to be as respectful as possible. If you were in it, I tried to like reach out, let people know. But yeah, generally, unless you my family, then then you're good. You're good. Now my family probably gonna be pissed off. It is what it is. But yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, Manuel, any final statement from you as we head on out? Anything you want people to know about you and your book?
No,
Male-gazed.
The Male Gazed. Yeah, it comes out May 30th. I'm very excited about it. I'll be doing some book tour stops. Right now I have one in New York and one in LA. So for those bicoastal folk, you can find more info on my website, and you can follow me on all of the socials. It's at BMANUEL, Bmanuel. But yeah, and thank you, John, for this, for the chat, and for getting to talk to Clarkisha, which it's funny, as you said at the beginning, we come from such different places, but it sounds like we also share so much, especially in our pop culture diet.
Yeah. And Clarkisha, how about you?
Last minute things. I just would say approach the book with an open mind. Even if you are queer, Black, whatever, you share an identity with me. You know, you're gonna have some of your biases challenged, because that, you know, I had to do that through my journey. So I try to put all of that on display. Because I didn't arrive at my politics again, like I just wasn't born into them. I had to like do the walking there myself, right? And also with the assistance of my friends. So that's what I would say. Try to keep an open mind. Other than that, you know, I also have a website that I try to post, you know, because my book tour is like on a rolling basis kind of thing. Because who has the money? so so yeah, I also have my book tour stuff on my website, www.clarkisha.com, clarkishakent.com, excuse me. And then you can follow me on Twitter at @iWriteAllDay_, and then at Clarkisha Kent on Instagram. And then I'm on Hive, like I've been playing with Hive still. So I'm on Hive Social at Clarkisha
I forgot
Kent.
about Hive.
Yeah, so that's where you can find me, and you know, I'll try to keep being my like enduring, charming, snarky self. But yeah, I definitely do feel social media break coming, you know, after like this week, after some of the book promotion that's happening. But thank you so much, John, for this. I did have so much fun. It was
my
so great.
pleasure.
And Manuel and Kenneth, great to like
Thank
meet
you. Pleasure to meet you too, and congratulations to both and much success. Pleasure to meet you guys.